हेलो।
हेलो चेक। हेलो 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 चेक चेक। हेलो। हाँ दी है। हेलो। ये आप यूज़ करो गाने के लिए।
हेलो।
तबले के लिए।
हेलो।
हेलो चेक। हेलो चेक।
हेलो चेक।
यार इससे बोलो गाने मुझसे बोलो।
हेलो। 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 हेलो।
बराबर है यार। इसको थोड़ा कमा देते हैं ना।
स्टार्टिंग अभी ना।
तो हमको मन नहीं कह रहे हैं गाने के लिए। पहले अभी मत गाओ, थोड़े लोग आए। साउंड चेक के लिए बोल रहा हूँ। हाँ, ठीक है ठीक है। अच्छा तुम्हारा कैंसिल करवा दूंगा क्या मैं?
हमको मन की शक्ति देना, मन विजय करे, दो हमको मन की शक्ति देना, मन विजय करे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय।
इसको सही आ रहा है, थोड़ा सा मैं पता है इसको मैंने क्यों रखा है, मैंने हारमोनियम नहीं आएगा यूट्यूब पे सुर इसलिए बस इसको मैंने ताकि अंदर से ड्राई ड्राई ना सुने। हाँ 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 ऐसे ऐसे लगा
हमको मन की शक्ति देना, मन विजय करे दूसरों के जैसे पहले खुद को जय करे। हमको मन की शक्ति देना।
तबला बहुत चल रहा है डी में उठाया हुआ है सुनो जरा हल्का सा हारमोनियम में
ठीक है, तो देखो ऐसे सेंटर में रखो, मैं ऐसे करके गा लूंगी, कोई इसलिए
पता है दिक्कत क्या है भाई साउंड ऐसे जाता है ना तो साउंड इधर ऐसे जा रहा है वही बात है ये तो गया खड़ 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 हो रहा है ट्रिपल चाहत चाहत जोर से गाना
अरे वो निकाल लेगी आवाज।
ठीक है ठेकेदार को ठीक है कौन सा है उसका नहीं 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 क्या ये वाला गाना ठीक है तो जहाँ पे थोड़ा लेट ही आएगा पर जैसे लगे ना कि तानपुर ज़्यादा आ रहा है ज़्यादा आ रहा है तो अंदर से बोल देना हमने कम बोल दिया ठीक है तो सुनो दो अंतरा के बाद मैं 30 हो जाता हूँ बड़ा हाँ हाँ अरे ठीक है इसी में खत्म कर दो पहले तो हमें सिंपल से सुन रहा है कोई जब गाएंगे होगा ना जब
हेलो
माइक ऊपर रखो माइक ऊपर
शुभ दिन है हम सबका लहरा लो तिरंगा प्यारा पर मत भूलो कुछ याद उन्हें भी कर लो, कुछ याद उन्हें भी कर लो, जो लौट के घर ना आए, जो लौट के घर ना आए। ऐ मेरे वतन के लोगों, जरा आँख में भर लो पानी, शहीद हुए हैं उनकी, जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। मेरे वतन के लोगों, जरा आँख में भर लो पानी, जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी, जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। तब घायल हुआ हिमालय, खतरे में पड़ी आजादी, जब तक थी सांस लड़े वो, जब तक थी सांस लड़े वो, फिर अपनी लाश बिछा दी, संगीन पे धर कर माथा, सो गए अमर बलिदानी, तो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी, जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। जब देश में थी दिवाली, वो खेल रहे थे होली, जब हम बैठे थे घरों में, जब हम बैठे थे घरों में, वो झेल रहे थे होली, थे धन्य जवान वो अपने, थी धन्य वो उनकी जवानी, जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी, जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। कोई सिख कोई जाट मराठा, कोई सिख कोई जाट मराठा, कोई गुरखा कोई मद्रासी, कोई गुरखा कोई मद्रासी, सरहद पर मरने वाला, सरहद पर मरने वाला, हर वीर था भारतवासी, वो खून गिरा पर्वत पर, वो खून था हिंदुस्तानी, तो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी, जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। ये खून से लथपथ काया, फिर भी बंदूक उठा के, 10-10 को एक ने मारा, थे वो दीवाने, क्या लोग थे वो अभिमानी, जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। तुम भूल न जाओ इनको, इसलिए कही ये कहानी, जो शहीद हुए हैं उनकी जरा याद करो कुर्बानी। जय हिंद की सेना, जय हिंद, जय हिंद की सेना, जय हिंद, जय हिंद, जय हिंद।
ये भी ले लो। खड़ा हो, खड़ा हो, खड़ा हो।
हेलो चेक।
ये आप तीनों कर लो। हाँ तो एक माइक दे देते तबला बेटा, एक बजाएं। हाँ हाँ एक दो। pama gare ga, sa ni da pama gare ga, sa ni da pama gare ni pa, pama gare sa ni sa ga ma sa ma ni pa, akruti samana te dayani pa, samani pa, avahasu sahasati te sangyachadvam samvadadvam Gachadvam samvadadvam sammanas
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for being with us in the second session of this 12th edition of Sansad Ratna Awards. I'm sure you had a great time in the first half of the event, seeing the best performing parliamentarians and the rest of the most sizzling thoughts from the Chief Election Commissioner, from the Honorable Minister, and legendary politician Veerappa Moily sir. So now in the second session, we are having two panel discussions. The first panel discussion will be on women empowerment, the role of women empowerment for a progressive society. And I'm so glad that today we have Ms. Gloria Barbena with us. Ms. Gloria Barbena is the Minister Council of Public Affairs at the US Embassy in New Delhi. She is a career diplomat and arrived in India in 2021. In her role, she oversees the immense efforts of public diplomacy across the country and across a range of subjects, including economic empowerment, climate, Indo-Pacific, and health. So we would surely know much about Ms. Gloria in this conversation. Thank you, Ms. Gloria, for being with us today. And we also have Mr. J. Rajiv Chaudhary, who is an educationalist, a moderator, a panelist, an actor, a director, a creative producer, and the link goes on. So we're so glad to hear women perspective of women empowerment from a male point of view, because that's more important. It's very easy for a woman to stand up and say women empowerment is important, but it's equally important for us to get the support from the counterpart to get this going. So thank you so much, Mr. J. Rajiv Chaudhary. So he is joining us on behalf of DAV Group of Schools, Chennai. And so he will take us through the education perspective of how women empowerment is, how progressive society needs women empowerment on. And we now have Srinivasa Prabhu, who's a joint secretary retired from the Lok Sabha Secretariat. And he had 35 years of experience working in the well of the parliament. So he had seen 6 prime ministers take in oath and step down from the office. So he had been a pinnacle of strength to much of the private members bill which had actually come on board. And so he will give us the government perspective of how women empowerment is important in ensuring that we lead to a progressive society. So with no further delay, so may I request our honorable speakers to please come on the dais. Check. Thank you, panelists, to being with us today. And there has always been a continuous support for women empowerment, at least post-independence. And we have been evolving through. So how do you see women empowerment earlier to what we are now, say, taking a span of about 50 years? And if you can also give us an experience of yours in the global arena, how women empowerment is being taken. So can we hear it from Ms. Gloria, please?
Hello? Okay, this works. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this incredible opportunity to participate with this illustrious panel and to support this really valuable award process that recognizes such important work. And I just want to give a huge shout out to the students who gave such a wonderful musical performance. They were fabulous, absolutely fabulous. You left me wanting more, so I'm a little bit jealous of the morning, who I understand had an actual performance that lasted a full half hour. We got 5 minutes, I want more. But really, you were absolutely wonderful. But thank you again for inviting me to be part of this panel and to talk a little bit about such an important topic, women's empowerment. Because obviously, unless women are fully participative, unless gender equality is real and practiced, and recognized across the globe, we're not realizing our potential as individual states in terms of our global potential. It's the right thing to do, obviously, but it's also a strategic imperative. From any government perspective, from any state perspective, I think it's sort of self-evident, but it bears repeating that when women are at the table, when they are fully empowered, when they are economically empowered, when they are part of the decision-making process, our world is safer, more secure, our world is more economically prosperous, our children have better futures, and frankly, I'm a little bit biased because I'm a woman, but I've also just seen it in practice. The decision-making process is different. The conversation is different. When women are economically empowered, they invest differently. They're thinking about healthcare. They're thinking about education. The sensibility, the appreciation for what's going on in our environment, environmental sustainability. Women generally come at it from a different, perhaps more holistic perspective. They're thinking about their children's futures. They're thinking about the impact on their families. They're thinking about the prices that they're paying at the grocery store or at the supermarket or in the public market, and how are they going to stretch that budget to feed their family. Likewise, when we're looking at just workplace empowerment, you raised sort of the question of what have we seen over the last 15 years, and huge strides, huge changes. Even, I think of my own personal experience. I've been in the State Department for over 30 years now, a little bit long in the tooth, but a long time. And even within the State Department, within the US government, certainly have seen huge strides. When I first joined, there certainly were women in the State Department, and I just use this as an example, but you'd walk into any room, and the people around the table, the decision makers, were all men. Over time, we saw a change in that, and I'm sad to mark the recent passing of Madeleine Albright, but when she became Secretary of State, the first woman Secretary of State, that was a huge marker for us. There's something about having a role model. There is something about having women who are willing to be positive mentors and who will bring up that next generation. And I have to absolutely give a nod to your comment about how important the men have been. The men who have recognized that the role and the place of women, the gender inclusivity is absolutely essential if we're to recognize our potential. And it was on all of you to create that space and to mentor. And certainly from my own personal experience, I have benefited enormously from innumerable men in very senior positions who saw something, who wanted to support my success, but even more broadly and more importantly, a more inclusive workplace, and so created that opening and not only the model, but also the channels for success. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, and you all will be specifically addressing it, but those avenues so that women and girls can be successful. It's not just about, we can, of course, anybody can be voted into Parliament or anybody can be voted into Congress, but it's how do we get women from point A to point B? How do we help them be successful candidates? How do we help them raise the funds and run the campaigns, just as an example? But that applies to every sector of endeavor, whether you're a medical doctor, whether you're an educator, whether a politician. There are all channels for success, and how do we help women succeed in that? And how do we help girls open their mentality so that they even consider those possibilities? We've done a lot of investment and a lot of conversation about STEM support. So, science, technology, economics, mathematics, I think it is. Also the arts, sometimes it's STEAM, recognizing that, hey, that creative element, those artistic elements is so important. But the emphasis being, at a certain point, girls self-select out from the science areas. Why is that? And helping them to understand and helping to provide those channels of support. So a heck of a lot to talk about today. I've thrown out a lot of different seeds and threads, but I'm just delighted to join the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gloria. That was so candid, but you really ran us through the points which actually had to be taken into account. Thank you so much for that. Srinivasa Prabhu, sir, if you can just, because you have had the experience being in the parliament for almost more than 30 years.
Yes.
And how important is women empowerment seen in public policy?
Yes. In fact, for many centuries, as we all know, that women were suppressed. They did not have any access to education. They did not have any, even for basic health facilities. They did not have access to any professional this thing. But when the constitution was drafted, it was felt that women should have a special preference. In fact, we have a special article for women. The government, there's a constitution, article 15 in the Constitution of India, which says that the government can make special provision for women. And under this article, the government has made many special provisions. In fact, we all know there's a separate ministry for women welfare, Ministry of Women Welfare. And special allocation of funds is made every year. And these funds are used for education, health, prenatal and postnatal for mothers. All this, the government spends all this for this welfare of women. And even some legislations have been made for the welfare of women, and you know that some of the legislations are totally biased in favor, you can say that they have been made in favor of women also, such that no person can think of harassing or humiliating any woman. You can say that some legislations are been drafted in such a way, but those are really required for the development. But for the economic development, I can say that way back, about 20 years back, the special help groups were formed in our country. This to help women who are not educated, to train them in whatever arts or portions they can manage, and help them to earn some money and financially independent. Even some banks also give special incentives for the women. Now, any program of the government will always have inclusion of women. And regarding the parliament, I can say that based on the need for the women empowerment, a standing committee on women empowerment was set up. Now, all policy decisions are discussed by members of parliament. There are 31 members, and Dr. Hina Gavit, who was awarded this morning, she is a chairman of that committee, and I believe that she was supposed to participate in this, but she had to rush suddenly. She is a chairman. All policies relating to women are discussed thoroughly in the committee and recommended to the government. And I know that many of the recommendations are accepted by the government. Government takes into consideration the recommendations of the committee. Definitely, the government and the parliament are conscious about the women welfare, not only economic, educational empowerment, but they are even conscious of the political rights. And there have been demands for the reservation for women in Lok Sabha and state legislatures. But right now we don't have the reservation, but the local bodies are the base route for the democracy of the country. We have reservation in local bodies. There is a first step for democratic setup organization. We have in almost many states, I can say that 50% of the seats are reserved for women in local bodies. When any decision is made or any decision is taken, they will take into account of the need and other welfare measures of the women.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Actually, that's true because for the past 75 years from where we have started post-independence, there has been a lot of protection and there has been a lot of concern which has been raised over the women, and the government has also taken, precautions and policies in the matter to ensure that women are protected and they are empowered as well.
Definitely.
So thank you for that insights. And now I'm going to Mr. Chowdhury. So I would want to hear from you, is it important for a society to be progressive only when the women are empowered? Does women empowerment have to do anything with a progressive society?
Yeah, that's an interesting ask, Priya, thank you. So I believe that, it's absolutely essential to have what I call world balance. And I think Gloria mentioned some of that, and she sort of gave a lovely overview of life at large and most avenues, leading towards the same. I think take it into a small sort of an example of, say, a boardroom or a team meeting where you have an equal number of men and women brainstorming a solution. You will find a better solution evolve when you have, both energies involved. I believe there are different energies, and the best comes forth when you have a perspective both from men and women. So the simple answer to your question is that absolutely necessary to have, women playing equally important roles. See, I come from a sector which is education, and I'm happy to say that given the fact that school education requires young children to be taken care of. So the natural tendency is towards, women teachers, and we have a much larger strength of women than men as teachers. So I come from a sector where I think perhaps the men need some empowering, but the women really play a significant role, very important role there. So let's take that one step further and say, what about the principles? What about leadership roles, right? And that's where I think it's become more important, and we are doing that currently. While, our principals, we run 10 schools, so 8 are women, women principals, and only 2 male principals. And I'm happy to state this, I'm not complaining. In our leadership, which is, say, the head office that really controls, runs, makes policies, critical decisions and strategy towards how to run things, we have an equal number today, which wasn't the case earlier, of men and women driving, the leadership roles of head of publishing, head of academics, head of sports, head of policy, and so on. So I'm really happy to say that this is something that is happening, not just with us, but I generally sense it happening across. But I think we need to speed that up because the world needs this balance. And the more we work towards, this equally empowered, male and female energies coming into play, you'll find great things happening for the nation and the world at large, right? I'd like to add a little thing which I personally, an example of what I personally experienced. I was running a workshop for women from a very leading bank, and the topic was about women's empowerment in the 21st century kind of thing. The strange thing that evolved out of that, and they had a male trainer, right? So that was interesting. I was the only male in the room, and the good thing that came about was that they said, we don't take up a senior position that, say, 2 levels up, there's a skip level, and you seem like you are ready in terms of qualifications, in terms of experience. You don't take it up because you are ridden with a certain guilt. What will happen to my children and my family? So I think this is to all the women in the audience here. You need to empower yourself from within first. You need to get past those hurdles that we tend to imagine, or perhaps society puts those demands on us. And I think we need to filter those, and we need to see it from a lens that's fine, just as my spouse or every male member in my family goes about having a career and manages a certain amount of sporting or social activity, and also, right, gives out time for the family, and I will do the same. And that is good enough. So many of them, I found 80% of them, and I had a crowd of, say, 30, if you were to take that as a sample, 80% said that, no, we don't take that position because of guilt. And very soon we find that the people we trained have actually taken those leadership roles. And so therefore there is a certain disappointment, there's a certain frustration that comes in, and I stay pretty much where I am for a pretty long period of time, which is totally unnecessary. So my call out really is, if you want that balance, the world needs it. There's no 2 ways about it. Everybody's talking about it, and there's been a huge effort. Srinivasaji just said, about how even the government is, going about creating the right avenues, the right opportunities, the right legislation, using all of that to ensure that women are empowered. I believe that women need to empower themselves from within first. So that's my little message with which I'll end.
Absolutely point, Bot. In fact, that's most important. I think we are not in that age right now where we look out for people to give us empowerment. I think it's more that we have to understand that we have that empowerment ourselves. So it's like taking space for your own self rather than looking at the atmosphere and the society to give you the space to go and grow. And taking a lead from there. Gloria, if you check for the past 100 years, the term women empowerment has really had evolved. So what we look at women empowerment in about 100 years before is not equal to what we look at it right now. So today we look at it in the perspective of gender equality, equal opportunity, and acceptability, rather than how we looked at it previously. So at this point in time, so if I really have to say, if a woman has to be empowered, so what do you think that woman has to do? Like, what are the challenges which will come her way, and what is it she has to go through?
That's okay. That's a really interesting question, because I also think it depends on where you sit. You know, all of us here are in very privileged positions, and we have had the advantage of tremendous education. We can vote. We're probably fairly economically independent, or have independent resources that we can draw from. If we have children, we have childcare, probably, or extended families that can help with that. We may have health insurance. We may have a job, and we do have a job that we can depend on. So for those of us who are privileged, and it is huge privilege, you know, we're in a very different place, and I think it is perhaps about our mindset about taking advantage of the opportunities that are open to us, and moving ourselves forward, and not having this sense of being an imposter. You know, there's a lot of literature written about this imposter syndrome, and women who are successful often feeling like, boy, am I really qualified to be here? Should I be here? When, of course, they're as well educated and have the experience as any of their male counterparts might have. But I would also kind of turn that around and just challenge the audience to think a little bit about you know, other strata who aren't anywhere near where we're at, you know, economically speaking, or being able to fully participate. And I think coming out of COVID, and I'll just throw this out to the group, when we're in this recovery period, it's really a moment to pause and look at the impact of COVID on different strata. And I think women have been disproportionately affected by the impact of COVID. They've often been the caregivers of the elderly and the children, and have had to stay home and just deal with that, because that was either the expectation or there was no one else to do it. As a result, I think they often dropped out of the workplace, and depending on whether they had formal or informal jobs, they dropped out, and a lot of those jobs have disappeared or are coming back in different ways. And so the question of, are those women going to be able to get back into the workforce easily? That's a question. Are those jobs there, and can they get back in? And then there's and I'll just throw this out there as well, there is the scourge of domestic violence. And we have really seen an uptick during COVID. And again, because women, you know, were often at home with their abusers, and all of the resources that would normally have been available to those women, the support systems, the first responders, the counseling, all of that, dried up or was not available, or they were not able to reach out. They weren't able to go to school or go to the workplace and access those communities. And so the impact of domestic violence on a woman's mentality, on a woman's ability to move herself out of a difficult situation, that's huge. And so when we talk about it's kind of up to women to self-empower, I couldn't agree more, but it's a very complicated picture, and depending on where that woman is sitting, I think it becomes even more complicated. And so as we look at what we need to be doing at a city level, at a state level, at a national level, at a multilateral level, we really do need to be appreciating those differences, and it just makes for a very complex picture. But I couldn't agree more that the avenues that are available to women now are so much more than they were 100 years ago. Where I'm sitting, I don't have to worry about voting. I got the vote. I have access to education. I have health care. You know, so those kinds of things for many women that create a completely different environment than they did 10 years or 100 years ago.
Absolutely right. In fact, we had days where minimum education, medication, and equality was a luxury. And today we're taking it as a right. And I think that's a big step. As a women community, we have come up all the way. Prabhu sir, I just wanted to ask you, now that you told me that the public policy shows a lot of inclination for women empowerment and women's security, where was the need that the government came up with this skill development, giving more of importance to women there as well, also giving more scope for women in the MSME? So is it a step taken by the government consciously to ensure that, as Gloria rightly said, that there are no much of dropouts after you ensure to grow your family, of having children or getting married? So is it a conscious step taken by the ministry to create, by the government to create a ministry on skill development and giving much of scope for women in MSME?
See, definitely the government is doing it all its best to economically, financially, and educationally improve the welfare of the women. Your question is that government is why?
No, I was asking you that now that we have an exclusive skill development ministry,
Skill development, yes.
yes, and where there is a huge scope for women to participate in the skill development ministry. There are a lot of policies where the skill development ministry does exclusively for women. Secondly, even in MSME, there is
MSME, okay.
exclusive policies which are for the women.
Yes.
So, because you were talking about the policy matters prior to this, so is it a conscious decision by the government to make such availability for women so that there are opportunities for women, even they get to do after they, decide to grow their family? Probably they don't drop out from regular family, regular jobs, because they're more self-reliable. This self-help groups makes them more self-sustainable, make them economically independent. So is that a conscious decision which the government has taken, is what I'm asking you?
No, it's not like that. See, the skill development is recently started, about 4 or 5 years back. The government set up a special department for skill development, where training is given to all to enable them to get trained in many fields. Like what happened is, we have electricians, we have plumbers, we have carpenters, but they're not all trained. They just learned the trade of tricks from their fathers, forefathers. But now we have a special skill development where they can get training and they will get a certificate, and once they get it, they get a job.
Yeah, that's for the male counterpart.
Yes, even for women, that's what I'm coming with it. Even for women, they can also have this opportunity. I can see that many women, especially, they get training in tailoring, cosmetics, makeup. They prefer this job. They are being trained in, in tailoring, garments, and they do take a job. Once they get that training, they can get some employment in good companies, and they can be independent, financially independent. Government is doing differently for this.
Yes, so thank you for that thought. And Mr. Chowdhury, because you're from the education background, I'm forced to ask you this question, which I've been having for years together. All through my life, the first rank and the second rank have always been in the class girls. And as you grow the ladder, the percentage recedes, and once you reach the top management in your whichever company you are, it's hardly a chance to reach out there. So my point is, when there had been an outstanding students in education, and they have been able to compete with their counterparts in school and colleges, why doesn't it happen in that workspace?
Absolutely. I may not have an answer for you, but I agree. I would raise the same question. And I think it's a very important question for all of us to think and ponder. And I may not have a ready answer for that, but you're absolutely right in the comparison that you make, that, the girl student does extremely well, is more conscientious at times, especially in the early years, is more, better scorer in terms of percentages, So where does that matrix switch? But it does, right? So I think there's a lot to do with, if you look at India, I think it's a lot to do with social structure, familial structures. It's also to do with the fact that there is a conditioning that happens for the girl child in the home, which is less now, with nuclear families and all of that. But in the old system, in the joint family, if you track back 75 years, it was clearly understood that the girls would not end up in a career, right? And hence, if there was a limited resource available in terms of capital in the house, that would go towards educating the male child. Totally wrong. I'm not saying this as something that should happen. It's wrong. Very wrong. And I'm glad it stands corrected. Today, it's seen very differently. A smart father looks at the fact that, hey, what if my daughter faces a situation later in life where she's dependent on somebody financially and say the marriage goes bust, or there is some serious other occurrence whereby she is rendered a single parent, right? Or even a single person. How would she take care of herself? Today, I think it becomes therefore more important to empower your girl child, right? That is one aspect. That, I think, will probably continue the matrix in the way it began, which is girl students doing really well, but continuing to climb, right? Through college, through later education, through post-graduation, and then in careers and jobs, right? Now, this is, I think, better seen in a more advanced society. Perhaps Gloria would know that best in like the United States or in Europe. But in India, it's a completely different structure because the family takes over. The family structure has a certain amount of certain conditioning, a certain sort of notion with respect to these things. So I think that needs correction. So when we look at women's empowerment from an India perspective, I would say that it's women's empowerment not by itself. You're looking at social change, you're looking at economic advancement, you're looking at, this is especially below the line, you're looking at skill enhancement, which Srinivasaji spoke about. You're looking at several things that eventually tie into women's empowerment. Women's empowerment by itself is not about a company deciding, hey, we'll take equal number of men and women, right? Or an educational institution like ours saying, we'll take an equal number of men and women. It's not that. It's about how many come out there and want to offer their services towards, a certain skill or towards a job or towards a career. The first, I think, fallout happens at the family level itself, right? And not because an employer chose otherwise. So I think in India, it's a very complex thing, especially below the line. You're looking at 4 or 5 different complexities and dynamics that need to be, it's about change of mindset, it's about, that larger social change, it's about making sure that economically, they are at that level where they can say, I can run a family, provided I go out and earn well and I have a better future for my children. And then, what kind of skill do you ensure that it's not about doing those menial jobs? It's about, having an intelligent person having equal opportunity as, say, one that went to a better institution or a better school or a better college, right? It's about dreaming about being, say, in the best blue chip corporate, and why not? So it's very complex there, and I think that's what is in some ways that the government addresses through, a better quota system or a reservation system, or stressing on, when there is the skill development council that's set up to say that we will give greater preference to women in certain skills so that, we truly start empowering them. So empowering is, is in India is for women, is a very, below the line especially. Above the line I would say we have come a long way. And it's almost there, I think a girl child who grows up in a middle class household, which doesn't have social restrictions or social conditioning, has equal opportunity already. And she goes out there and she proves, she joins the top 5, blue chips, or she gets into the top 5 consulting firms. She gets into the best institutes. She does brilliantly in her career. So I think we need to separate these two.
Well, yes. Gloria, you want to add something on that?
Just a couple of thoughts, and I couldn't agree with the points that you've made more, and it really is about a cultural shift, and I just am so happy to say, certainly in my career, that I've seen that shift happen. And again, it all depends on where you sit and the privileges that we all have. But the young men that I supervise now are as involved in their child care responsibilities. They will take leave to, and the expectation is, and their wives are working as well, that they will take leave to take care of their child when that child is ill. And it's not always going to be the wife or the mother who's the one that automatically takes time off to take care of that child. So that's a pretty significant cultural shift. And that wouldn't have happened, honestly, when I first joined the Foreign Service. It was always, well, if you're the mother and you're working, then you're the one that takes time off, and your career might suffer, or you might not, your boss might not be able to expect you to complete that assignment, and so may give that assignment to somebody else that would have been career enhancing. So that's been a real career shift. But I also have to say, when we're talking kind of about the mentality of young women and the sort of the opting out, part of it, I have to say, is about that special mentor, that someone who sees that possibility in you and says, hey, why didn't you go for that job? You're qualified. Often, for whatever reason, young women, women generally, don't put themselves out there or don't think that they can do that. They will often apply for the jobs they know they can do and not for the aspirational jobs. And there's a clear, and the research shows this, there's a clear difference in how men and women generally pursue jobs. And so that's a mindset and a cultural change. And then the third point I would just note is just creating the conditions that allow women to succeed. And in the United States, we have a lot of women who are the heads of single households. They don't always have the broad family support that you all have here in India. That's just been the nature, or families are far away. Americans move a lot, they follow their jobs, and so they may be very far away from that mother and grandparents and not have that structure to rely on. So part of it depends on, what is the employer doing, what is the state doing, what is the government doing to provide the support, whether it's in child care, whether it's maternity and paternity leave, whether it's other support that allows women to still be the head of their household, to still be, to care for their children and take on, and not just children, it's elder care as well, family care, that allow them to do that and still succeed and pursue, career opportunities.
Well, that's perfect. In fact, there is a saying, when you educate a girl, you educate a woman. When you educate a boy, you educate a man. When you educate a girl, you educate a family. I think the actual intent of that quotation was something else. And it's high time that women come out of that guilt factor of ensuring not to be, feeling much guilty, to you need to take it a little bit relaxed. That's okay not to be available every time. So I'm telling this to myself because I'm not at home for 5 days, so my kid's back. So it's okay to let go, because sometimes you really have to do something which drives you to take that energy forward. And we've started having questions from the audience. So I'm just taking this with Mr. Srinivas Prabhu. So there is a question, we don't have a name. So the question is just creating policies, and there are much bigger policies and laws which are coming in.
Yes,
There are a lot of policies which we are creating, and there are a lot of laws which we are creating for women. But still the crime against women is not that, controlled. So where is the lacunae? We have the law, and is still the society not ready to take women on the same foot? Is it that the reason that the crime is not being controlled? In fact, the crime rate has gone higher, and the intensity of crime has also gone worse. So then where are we bridging the policy and the reality?
Yes. You are absolutely right. We do have strict laws to control crimes against women. In fact, 4 or 5 years back, the laws were amended to make it more stricter. But the question is, the time taken to dispose of a case, it takes much longer, much longer. Every time there's an adjournment, and it keeps on getting adjourned, the case getting adjourned. By the time the case is disposed, the victim does not get justice. She is mentally shattered, physically, mentally, financially, economically, everything shattered on all counts. So what I feel is, the law is definitely stricter. In fact, it could be made more stricter, but the implementation is needed. Much stricter implementation is needed. And there should be a law that the cases should be disposed of in a specific time. Right now, there's no law to control the adjournments. Every time the case is adjourned to a later date, much later date, but that should be controlled first. When there's a provision that cases can be disposed of in a fixed period, I think this can be controlled to some extent.
Okay.
Some extent.
And are we socially
And
open?
this, moreover, the law, the punishment should be made more stricter. And it should be, some cases it should be instant, then only this can be controlled. The law should create a fear that no one should think of committing a crime. That's what I feel.
The punishment should be more stronger.
The time should be, there should be a time limit with which the cases should be disposed of.
I get that.
Now there's no time limit. The case goes on.
So
years
probably that's
together.
giving the relaxation for the crime doer, because he feels that the case is going to run all through his life, so he can seep through. So
Yes.
probably if we have a limited time frame for the cases to be dispersed of, then
Definitely.
it gives him a little fear to act upon it.
But I went 2-3 months back, I read a news item in Rajasthan. A case of rape was decided in just 1 week.
Yes.
So that should be the spirit. If this happens, I think definitely the crime will go down.
True, but the case differs from case to case,
Yes.
Srinivasan sir, you know that very well. The point here is it's about right to be heard, because you cannot just rush on the name of giving quick justice. So you have to give equal opportunity to all of them to be heard. And yes, probably our judiciary system has to expand its wings a little larger, having more number of benches available for dispersing of the cases faster, because that's one thing that we've always been talking about, that we have to disperse the pending cases
Within
at the
time limit.
earliest.
There should be a time limit.
Yes, I get that. Thank you for that. And Mr. Chowdhury, there's a question for you. So you are, again, you had been a counselor training women, and you are again talking about women empowerment here. We're glad to have you here with us. So what would you, how would you direct the children who are at the age of, say, 14 to 21, because that's the most crucial age for be it a boy or a girl, to decide how the rest of the life is going to be. The right orientation is what is important. So what would be your advice for the boys and the girls of the age of 14 to 21 in how we have to get equity and gender equality?
So I think in a advanced sort of social, at a certain level, which is what I think Gloria and I have been talking about on and off, I think it's already there, right? Where there are the example that Gloria gave us, and I have examples. I have a friend of mine who put it out on Instagram. He was actually a person who came in as a trainee into my small consulting enterprise. Later on, went on to set up his own enterprise. He takes a holiday once or twice a year with his daughter alone, right? And he says, I have to do this because it means that my wife, my spouse, can pursue her career without any difficulty, without any guilt. That she doesn't have to accompany us every time, we take the children out. And right now he has one little daughter who's about, say, 3 years old, 2 years old. He said the strange thing was that at every airport, he went on this long trip, and he said at every airport there are several women who came up to him and said, can we, help you with the child? Right? And they sort of moved forward and said, and they saw him, maybe struggling a little bit, trying to get the milk bottle out, or, get some food, or, get something organized. And it was a solo trip. So he said, no, I have my wife back home, and I'm doing this with a purpose, and I have to do this. So I don't need your help. Right? So I think it's out there already. And, but in a certain section of society, which is the word I think we've been using is, many of us are blessed. We are, privileged. And in that community, I think there is an awareness, there is an equal amount of respect, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So if anything, we have to just reiterate the fact that, respect your fellow being as a equal partner, right? And, or just an equal other member, and not be at all oriented by male or female, in terms of choice of a friend or choice of, a person who you sit and do your project with, or a person that you travel with. And I think gender shouldn't come into it at all. And I think some of that, and I see that in, with my children as well, and I've seen them actually
I'm sorry,
transcend
I'm
it.
just interfering on here.
Yeah.
Is it also a parental issue here that the parents also don't raise their kids on the equal platform?
Very much, very much. So it's not just on the institution. I think a lot, in India especially, a greater conditioning comes from within the family, because we are, heavily family structure driven, right? So the educator has some say, and I think what is learned at home can be further reiterated, right? But it begins at home, and it's extremely important that the parents live it by example. Is, the husband truly respecting the wife's decisions, or giving her an equal say in all matters, and not cutting her off and saying, hey, these are the things I decide. That's it, it's done. And she says, why didn't you consult? It's not necessary, So I think it starts with little things like that. So do you live by example? And do you teach your children that? And more than what the children hear in school or hear otherwise, they look and they experience, right? And they see what's going on at home and in their friends' homes, and they learn from that a lot more than they would out of a textbook or of something written on the board or a lesson, right? So in India, I would say the family structure plays, a very, very significant role. But then again, the more privileged, the more, educated, it's already happening, and children are on par with each other. Parents are giving the daughter equal opportunity. But below the line in India, in the smaller towns, the smaller villages, it's a completely different story, or even economically. So one is the geographical division, the other would be the economic divide. And that sector, I think, still carries a lot of the, I would say, old bad habits of, perhaps differentiating. So I think that needs to change. I really don't know if I answered your question pinpoint. I went all over the place.
Yes. But somewhere we could understand what are you coming to. And so I have a final question for this panel discussion to Ms. Gloria. First of all, Gloria, we are very proud for the position you're holding as a woman, because it is so much to learn. And I would just want to know one of your decisions which you had taken, where you had to face the challenge of being a woman in a leadership role, and you took it to the right way and delivered the right thing. So just give us one of your such experience where you had difficulty because you were a woman, but you overcame that.
That's it. That's a really interesting question, because I have to say I've not been conscious of a particular difficulty because I'm a woman, but it gets back again to perhaps my own self-doubts or own sort of hesitation to exercise the authority of my position or of my training to do what I need to do. And, and I have to say, it gets back to an earlier point that I made, sort of reaching for those positions that are challenging and then fully inhabiting those positions is what really, proves the mettle, I think. And in my previous posting before coming to India, I was the chargé d'affaires in Costa Rica. And those are one of those opportunities that you don't know is going to happen until it comes to you, because we didn't have an ambassador, and so I was the number 2, and so I became the number 1. And then by default, you're it. And, a whole team is looking to you to make decisions, and, they expect you to lead. And, the host government expects you to show up and be an interlocutor and represent your government and do the necessary. And so there's sort of a poetic, in a way, and it gets back kind of full circular by putting myself into that situation, maybe not fully appreciating what it would mean until I was actually in the role. Then you step up and you realize, yes, I can do this job, and hopefully do it pretty darn well. And the team respects and joins together, and it turned out well. At least I didn't make too much of a mess of it. But it's one of those things that until you actually put yourself in the role, you don't really know, and then it's like, yeah, I'm prepared. I can do this. So, for what that's worth.
Thank you so much. We really had a wonderful conversation, and to take back, I think, first of all, talking about women empowerment, our wonderful panelists have made it very simple. Make women empowerment simple, and started from within, and things will follow. Thank you so much for your time. And can I request Mr. Prime Point Srinivasan to please deliver a token of appreciation to all our speakers. Yes, this is the chairman and the founder of Prime Point Foundation, Mr. K. Srinivasan, felicitating Ms. Gloria for being with us today. And so, to Srinivas Prabhu, sir, who is the former Joint Director, Parliament, Lok Sabha. And for very insightful thoughts from Mr. Rajiv Chaudhary for being with us today. So we will surely take the crux of the conversation and see how can we reach it to be heard in the Parliament. And thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful having a conversation with you all. Thank you so much. May I invite Tarun Nangia, a wonderful friend of mine who has been thick and thin in running the show. He's been of a great support to me and a conceptualizer. And legally speaking, with Tarun Nangia, one of the most famous TV show which he anchors with the legal entities, with the Supreme Court retired judges, sitting judges, and Supreme Court advocates. So he is a wonderful moderator in turn. So I'm leaving the dais to Mr. Tarun, and he takes it from here.
Thank you, Priyadarshini, and it is good to be back here. I was here last year, though this gathering was held at a different place, and it is a pleasure to be here this year also. And first of all, I would like to thank Prime Point Foundation and Priyadarshini, who's got this afternoon together. And may I welcome Professor C. Raj Kumar, Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University. Also Vikas Arya from the DAV group to please come on stage and good to see you.
How are you doing?
Without much ado, I will start this afternoon by telling you a short story before we start this discussion. This was in the year 2008. In the year 2008, I met a 33-year-old man in the city of Pune. It was at the Le Meridien Hotel. That man and me, I was working with a newspaper that time. And we met over coffee. He said that he had a vision to set up a university which would be a university that India had not seen. I remember we had a discussion with that man about why India loses a lot of foreign exchange, because a lot of students from this country go and spend money abroad. But when this university comes up, which will be in the form of a law school and then other faculties, will ensure that we have world-class education in India. That man is none other than Professor C. Raj Kumar, who ended up setting one, if I may say, bringing up India's map on the world stage. This university that he set up is, in a sense, known and spoken of in almost all continents of the world. That is to Mr. C. Raj Kumar's credit, and many, many congratulations to you with what you have done at Jindal Global Law School. And I also would like to welcome Vikas Arya from the DAV group. He is not only in the field of education, he had a career as an investment banker earlier. So he brings that expertise with him. And I like people from varied backgrounds who choose education, because in India, we don't see that. Not many people would choose education, but I would like to congratulate Mr. Arya for that, taking that decision and ensuring that education gets fine minds like you. And we'll get straight to the topic today, being the topic of how, in a sense, digital education has been spurred because of COVID. I think I've got the two best panelists to speak on that. And we will start with introductory comments. May I request Professor Rajkumar to start with laying the ground of the discussion with his introductory comment, and then we move on to Vikas Arya.
Thank you very much, Tarun. And first of all, I want to congratulate Prime Point Foundation as well as Priyadarshini and other distinguished individuals who have put together this event, and also for honoring the parliamentarians for their contribution. And I'm very delighted that we are having this panel discussion. It was illuminating to hear the previous panel discussion. I think it also ties in very well with what we're discussing today. I thought I'll just, in terms of introductory comments, what I want to say is that I think it is only fair to say that the last over 75 years of independence has seen very significant strides in education, but we have not achieved our full potential. The reality is, over 2,000 years ago, India had Nalanda, Takshashila, Vallabhi, and Vikramshila type institutions, which fundamentally transformed the landscape of global education. In fact, Takshashila and Nalanda had students from around the world. It was multidisciplinary. It had the entire gamut of liberal arts, humanities, social sciences. And so, while at the dawn of Indian independence, we had 20 universities, and today we have 1,000 universities. We've expanded the higher education sector, and I want to speak about higher education in particular, as we have Mr. Arya speaking about school system in general. I think we have not paid enough attention to the role of higher education and its transformative potential for building a knowledge society. And what today we are doing, and the National Education Policy 2020 is a very good example of what India is trying to achieve when it comes to envisaging a future where knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination becomes the most central aspect of the future of nation building. This expansion of higher education sector from 20 universities in 1947 to nearly 1,000 now has seen extraordinary access. It has laid a lot of emphasis on quantity, but unfortunately it has neglected quality of higher education. So this aspect of quality ought to be the most important factor in the future. Lastly, I would say that by way of my ending my closing remarks, I would say that the life expectancy in India at the dawn of independence was nearly 35. Now it is over 70. Over 850 million people in India are less than 35 years of age. When most parts of the Western world will become older, most parts of Eastern world, including China and Japan, will become older, India will be younger and will be younger for a longer time. This demographic dividend that we have because of this situation can only be useful if we are able to provide high quality education to the young people who will not only shape the future of India, but also the future of the world.
Thank you so much for that introductory address. Before I go to Mr. Vikas Arya, and if I look at our topic today, the new normal in education system post-COVID effect, I remember listening to our skill education, the skill development minister about 4 years ago. And he said that India had to import dumper drivers from Chile. And they used to pay them about 1,60,000 a month just to drive dumpers. And he said, we don't have a single training institute for driving dumpers. He said, same for plumbers. He said, India during COVID had a shortage of plumbers, because obviously your plumbers were from all and about. Most of them went to their village. So India was denied accessibility to basic professions because we don't have any courses to train such people. Traditionally looked down upon professions, but today if you see, a lot of graduates are out of jobs, and not everybody needs professional education. They need vocational education. And with that aspect, that's why school becomes very important, because if not everybody is benefiting from professional education. If you don't benefit from taking a professional education, then many people will only opt for vocational education. So that's why schools need to be very good, because that's probably the only education they get in their life. And what Professor Rajkumar said, very important, that we prioritize, in a sense, quantity over quality. Even if they are educated, it may not mean much because the quality is so poor. With that point, I would request Mr. Vikas Arya to give his introductory remark.
Thank you. It's very interesting, a way to look at the higher education sector. In terms of, if you look at the schooling sector, I'll first lay out as to what I feel is a fundamental challenge in the sector. And maybe it has its effects also on the higher education sector, but maybe I'll focus myself on the schooling sector. I think fundamentally, we're all quite confused as to how should the school education sector be handled. If you look at the schools and you divide them into different categories, you have the schools catering to the elite, which is like the IBs, and charging about, say, $1 lakh a month, and that's one layer. Then you have within the private schools, you have those catering to the middle class, which will be charging about 50, 60K, 70K per annum. Then you have the lower, absolute budget schools, then you have government-aided schools, and then you have the government schools, and then you have some places corporation schools as well. I think, plus this has been looked at as it's a concurrent subject. I think eternally there's a big confusion as to who really kind of ensures that, you spoke about quality, right? So quantity, so one can measure how many buildings, how much square feet, what is the size of the classroom, right? So I think we've been overly looking at some of those aspects, right? And though there's some changes now, I think especially in new education policy, online degrees to my mind is a huge, change in that particular direction. But staying again in the school sector, there's a lot of confusion in terms of how do you handle this sector. So state government, central government, the DEOs, the private sector, whether it should be even corporate, in sense whether you allow private players as a trust, not for profit. Even today, technically, you can't set up a school if you're a for-profit entity, right? So typically, you set a not-for-profit, then you have a management company, you still have private equity capital, private capital entering the sector, right? So it's actually completely, I think from a regulatory perspective, there's a big need to ensure that there's clarity on this. And allowing high-quality private sector to come in a clean manner, and especially I think not-for-profits, to come in a clean manner, I think is something which greatly helps. The NEP does once again talk about it. But I think structurally, I think there's a huge challenge that still persists. And because of that, the quality suffers. Because infrastructure can always be still measured. Quality of teachers, quality of the curriculum, the way it's being delivered, these aspects are extremely difficult to measure. Post-COVID, again, has its own set of challenges, some for the positive, and some, I think, even from there's some additional challenges that have come up, but maybe that's something which we'll discuss, as we go along. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that introductory remark. I remembered a conversation I had about 5 days ago with a judge. We were having coffee, and he said his brother's son studies in a law school in Hyderabad, and he's been behind him to get admission at the Jingle Global Law School. And he's been convincing him that since you have already got you admitted, please forget it, just focus on your studies. So I think that I recollected this as I saw you. This happened about 4 days ago. Then I left for Bombay. I just came back yesterday. So that's in a sense, what I call that when institutes become places where a lot of students aspire to go. There is IITs, there's BITS Pilani, but in law, JGLU was able to make that mark in just 10 years. But my question comes in from there. For a certain class of people, yes, you've become aspirational. They say we don't want to go to UK, but we can get as good education here in New Delhi. To take it to the masses, do you think that's the big challenge for India? Because you, in your first introductory remarks, spoke about demography. We have so many students. Do you think India is facing that huge challenge, and that, in a sense, revealed itself during COVID, when none of us realized that so many doctors or medicine students are studying in Ukraine? We couldn't imagine that would be the number. What would you think of this? And in reaction to post-COVID, now what happened is, because in Ukraine, a lot of parents are not willing to send back their children to Ukraine for studies, which means these capacities have to be created here in India. What are the challenges?
Absolutely. Listen, I think, one of the things that these forums should facilitate is that we should be very candid about the state of affairs. I bet that if situation even slightly improves, all these students will go back to Ukraine. Because there are no opportunities here. The reality is we have far too many mediocre institutions which don't offer even reasonably good quality education.
But they charge a lot.
They charge a lot. And the large number of institutions are engaged in all kinds of dubious activities, and a very small number of good public or private institutions where accessibility simply to enter into it is difficult. And of course, I don't need to tell you about the situation of what happens with high school examinations, when I'm sure he knows this. I have to say this anecdote without mentioning the name of a college. A very leading college in Delhi University a few years ago, I was sitting with the principal, and a parent with his daughter walked in and said, Professor, my daughter wants to join your college. She's got 97% in 12th. And then the principal looked at the parent and said, oh, no, I can't talk to anybody less than 99, please leave. And that's not an exaggeration. And that year, the cutoff of that college was 100%. And I'm sure you can guess this. But the reality is, And then when I asked this principal that, you must be very proud of this, and I was sarcastic about it and said, you have this amazing student, for all you know, she doesn't get admission here, she may end up going to Oxford or Cambridge, because that's where people who don't get into colleges here would go. And he said, Professor Saab, let me tell you, mera situation ye hai, कि 25 to 30% of my teachers don't come to work. I can't do anything about them. Another 30 to 40% have become very senior. I can't do anything about them. And then he said, बच्चे अपने आप पढ़ लेते हैं, हमको कुछ करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. And this is one of the leading top colleges of the country. So, talking about what you said, Tarun, that we have unfortunately neglected education as a nation-building project. Now, because of which today we are seeing huge challenges across mediocrity. I mean, in fact, every aspect you can pick it up. Today, across you, there is now, anecdotal evidence was there before, but now there is evidence across 10 to 15 states of India. Let's say office attendant positions are advertised. Pune, basically. The qualification is 7th standard and ability to ride a bicycle. You have lakhs and lakhs of engineers, thousands of PhDs, not fake ones, real ones, genuine ones, millions of undergrad degree holders applying for these 100 positions there across the country. So in a way, we can't escape. There is this whole idea that somehow we overcome the quality element by having more institutions is simply not possible. The second major challenge is the big public and private divide. If you see historically, the public investment in education has been reducing drastically. Barring the NEP, which has made promises, which is not yet implemented, education investment for public sector has reducing. And unfortunately, when we opened up in the higher education sector, the private sector, the privatization of higher education in India did not lead to the creation of Harvard University, which is the private university, Yale University, which is the private university, Stanford University, which is the private university, MIT, which is the private university. We ended up creating a lot of mediocre private institutions. So we really need to recognize and emphasize the need for quality, both in public and private sector. We need to focus a lot more on private philanthropy and significant investment through corporate social responsibility, where people are prepared to contribute to education. We need a regulatory environment which is providing freedom from regulation and a greater degree of institutional autonomy. Today, for example, every aspect of education is regulated. I mean, NEP promises it. Look at schools, for example. Schools which are, endeavors which have been created by individuals, they simply can't decide anything. They are dependent upon state government's mercy. The state governments decide what fees they should fix and what kind of salaries they should, even though they are not provided any funds by the government. So we have, unfortunately, messed up the system so badly that whatever attempts to recover today is both piecemeal and myopic.
Thanks for this very good exposition on this topic, and it only reminds me of my conversation with Nitin Nohoria. He was the erstwhile Dean of the Harvard Business School. I had a long conversation with him way back in 2015 at the Shram Shakti Bhavan, which is the office of the Ministry of Power, where he was come for a lecture, and we had lunch together. And he told me one thing: as a dean, one of my main responsibilities is to attract funding for Harvard. And I was able to attract 250 crores. That check was cut by Mr. Ratan Tata long back. I asked him, why so much money? You've got $45 billion. He said, without money, there is no education. You have to have money for education, and that's why all universities needs to be the for-profit, because if you don't have money, there is no education. And that is why my next question to Mr. Vikas Arya, if we don't have for-profit education institutions in India, why will people invest in this sector? You don't need to be clothed, and you should have, round tipping of funds here and there, which we all know what is the reality of this sector in India. For-profit institutions, will it change the kind of money we need? In a sense, we don't have to depend on philanthropy. If it's for profit, money will just flow in. What do you think about that?
So I think we should clearly have a regulatory framework wherein institutions should come forward and say, okay, we are a for-profit,
and you do. I think there's space for everyone.
Yes.
There is space for good not-for-profits to kind of work in the sector and for good for-profits as well. But just make them transparent. So that changes the whole dynamic. Right now, because you don't allow it in the right sense, so people are like using all sorts of means and methods, that's making things opaque and more difficult, for everyone. And another thing, just like to point out is on the teacher side, right? I think that's an absolute national crisis that besets the country. And it's something which, it's scary. Because, see, a regulatory framework can still change in a matter of a couple of years, bring in some law in the parliament, get things done. But I think we are in a state wherein you just don't have enough teachers in this country. And that's not going to change overnight. Even if you wake up and you decide to, just put some bills out there, get private investment, I don't think...
So you're saying buildings can come up, but teachers can't?
Okay, we have about 95 lakh teachers in this country, okay? Always 95 lakh teachers in this country, my, just guesstimate is that quality teachers, my senses would not be more than like a lakh or 2 lakhs.
That's all.
I think this balance amount is like see who gets into the, who wants to be a school teacher today, right? If you don't have any other, in most cases, and especially after the IT boom, right? So, previously you would have a lot of, cases wherein, say, even from good families, people would still want to look at education.
Precisely this is why I'll come to C. Raj Kumar, because Professor Raj Kumar, I speak to many professors from all over India. They aspire to have a job in your institution because you pay much better than the others. That is why you attract the best talent. And that is why I want to ask you, if you have for-profit institutions, do you think the quality of teachers will drastically go up?
So I don't want to comment on the school education, but I will say one thing. As far as higher education is concerned, I am convinced that the for-profit model would not work for a number of reasons. I think one of the reasons is that, and I've been a very staunch supporter of not-for-profit institutions, because I don't know of a single good university in the entire world which is a for-profit university, not one. So Harvard, you talked about Harvard Business School, it's an entirely not-for-profit. But we need to understand what the meaning of not-for-profit and for-profit is. The idea of a not-for-profit institution is that promoters or donors who put in money into the institution does not get any money out of it. And the fact that, and whatever additional resources that the university or institution makes is reinvested in the institution itself. That's a simple principle. Unlike, for example, a private equity investor investing in a mall or an aeroplane or something like that. This distinction is important because many things that the university does may not be able to be measured in the near term, and in any case, its contribution is always much longer in terms of society.
That's a point. I'll now, before I take questions which all of you have given me, I want to ask you a question. In the US, we see people donating their entire savings to universities because they know good use will be made of it. Research and inventions do take place in these universities. India, we don't see that trend. Why?
So I think, well, first of all, US example is unique in the world. In fact, I had the privilege to study at Oxford, which is 800 years old, Harvard, which is 400 years old, and then, of course, Delhi University and Loyola, and then Hong Kong. But nowhere in the world, philanthropy of the kind that US, not just big universities, schools, colleges, alumni giving back, it's a culture. And they have given a phenomenal taxation framework so that, private individuals are able to get tax benefits out of that contribution. Unfortunately, in India, the lack of transparency in tax administration, including real benefits that philanthropists can have when it comes to investing, and lastly, we don't do enough to celebrate that philanthropy. In fact, one of the reasons why, and you mentioned about Tatas are still exceptional, they've done here as well, but even today, Indian philanthropists are much more comfortable to give it away to international institutions than in India for reasons ranging from they being better recognized and celebrated for their contribution abroad, maybe for perpetuity. All kinds of fears and concerns are around their mind whether their money will be better utilized. A beautiful example is Warren Buffett, who gave away $25 billion to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, Warren Buffett himself has a foundation. His children have foundations. And when people asked why he gave the money to Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he said he knew that his money will be better spent by the Gates Foundation.
That's a very
That
important
is the
point.
type of philanthropy we need to build.
And in fact, if we have some world-class institutes like the one you built, I think at least we will be to instill that confidence that if somebody pays in a donation, that money will be spent. I'll go to Mr. Vikas Arya and we will start our questions from the audience now. You're free to give the questions a pass in case you don't think they fit our discussion. Why 3-language policy is not acceptable to various states in India? You may choose to answer or give it a pass. Second, why not centralize and nationalize all private medical colleges and implement NEET in India? Third is, please give IELTS training, so that's irrelevant, but would you want to take that?
The language policy, what is the exact question?
The first one? Why 3-language policy is not acceptable to various states in India?
They're not acceptable. That's a purely political, it's just become a political tool. Actually, I think it's something which is, it's a pretty good, it's a pretty neat policy. And it should be overall adopted, but there are some challenges on this front. And let me just give an example. So now in multiple states, right? And I'll take Tamil Nadu for, wherein say we have 10 odd schools. So at class 10 level, even in a CBSE school, the child has to write a Tamil paper in a class 10 board exam. And that to my mind is like so if a child, for example, it's a parent in the army, he gets a posting in Chennai and he gets to, say Chennai in 8th standard. How can he write in 10th standard a Tamil paper? And this is not in Tamil Nadu. A few other states also have it. So I think that this language, so mother tongue, absolutely. But then in a country as diverse as India, wherein people are constantly moving from one, state to the other, you cannot kind of accommodate everyone's mother tongue. For example, if we have in our campus, we have children from all parts of the country. So we can't like start teaching in Gujarati, in Marathi, Bengali. We can't accommodate all these languages. Now that's a very, very practical consideration as to how do you ensure that, you cater to different audience. So I think the NEP focuses more on mother tongue. But in a state, everyone may not be, having the same, mother tongue. There'll always be a minority that will be from different parts of the country. So that's an aspect that needs to be considered. But otherwise, it's a good policy to be, to be adopted. And but for political reasons, yes, it does become even NEET, for example, is not adopted and accepted.
And this is a very important point because while it's a good policy, it has not taken into account the current state of nation. People are mobile. Today, for example, I am originally from the state of Tamil Nadu, but today when I go to schools in Tamil Nadu, there are students from across the country who are studying, one. And secondly, they may end up studying in Tamil Nadu for 2-3 years, then they'll go to West Bengal, then they go to Maharashtra. So somehow, any public policy need to have a mechanism for this. One of the ways by which one can do this is this kind of policy will be applicable for people who are continuously studying in a state for over a certain number of years. But that's the point which needs to be kept.
Now, one subsequent question for you, Professor Kumar. Does the brain drain start right from the education phase itself? In about 2 minutes, if you could explain that.
Yeah, so listen, I think people, there is something to be said about the fact that people look for opportunities and end up doing things to advance their careers and study plans. Like I knew, for example, that a large number of students from India went to and continuously go to China for medical education. This war gave us this new information that there are all these medical colleges in Ukraine where hundreds of our students. And I'm sure if we investigate it is more, there will be probably 20, 30 countries our students are going. Not because of the fact that they suddenly discovered that Ukraine and China are mecca of medical education. It just does, India doesn't provide opportunities. So we really, I say the same thing for this brain drain too. We need to create opportunities for our students in the form of education. And then we also need to create opportunities for our professionals to be able to work in those environments. Now, for example, I run a university which has 1,000 faculty. Over 100 of them are foreign nationals from 45 countries in the world. They are full-time faculty living in Sonipat. And then rest of my faculty are from around the world, Indians who could be anywhere in the world but are in India. So we need to create an ecosystem, a set of conditions. One of the reasons why many of our institutions, including IITs and IIMs and even big universities, have not been able to attract talent is that somehow a lot of people don't believe that their qualifications, experience, contributions will be adequately taken into account and their career trajectory will be duly recognized. By the way, this is not only unique for universities. You can even pick up private sector, for example. I know many working professionals will end up preferring to stay in other parts of India than in India. We need to, like I'll give you a very good example. We were interacting with a bunch of Chinese students, 5 years ago. In fact, the Prime Minister had just been to Tsinghua University. He gave a big speech at Tsinghua University. And in an informal interaction, we were asking them why they are not thinking about India. Believe it or not, almost 50% of the students who were women, they said that they feel India is unsafe. Unsafe. India is not safe for women, and that's why they don't want to study. Now, these are very important factors that an international student will be taking into account. We can talk about data and experience and all of that and say maybe that's not right, but the perception is, and it's not a biased perception. They want to come to India, they want to experience India, but the reluctance that they have. So when you talk about education and India becoming a higher education destination, we need to address curriculum, course structure, infrastructure, transportation, urban planning, safety, safe neighborhoods, a whole range of things. Today, Australia has become a global destination for higher education because they have addressed and they continue to address all these things. Australia's second largest contributor to its GDP is education. They bring in students from around the world, including India, and that contributes to Australian economy. I don't see any reason why India cannot be, and not just for the large number of 50 countries in Africa, for Middle East, for South Asia, for Southeast Asia. India's long history and civilizational heritage has something to be said about. And the last thing I want to say is that there are students here. I want to encourage them to watch this absolutely amazing web series called Rocket Boys. If you have not already done, please watch it. It's the most inspiring thing you would ever see because it's a story of both Vikram Sarabhai, one of India's leading scientists, and Homi Bhabha. Both of them were Cambridge graduates. In most difficult circumstances, pre-independent India, they left Cambridge, came back to India. C.V. Raman, who had already got the Nobel Prize, was the director of Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. And Homi Bhabha set up the laboratory there. And Vikram Sarabhai comes in, and they were building the future of Indian science. Of course, Dr. Abdul Kalam joins them much later. But that story tells how much of passion, commitment, dedication that these young scientists were. And at that time, Nehru was involving scientists directly, and academics were able to engage with the Prime Minister for building the future of Indian science. So in a way, it is only fair to say that regardless of whichever political party in power, we have neglected the role of universities. We have simply sidelined the entire educational project in our, zeal and enthusiasm to promote so many other things. The only way by which we can recover and retrace those steps that Vikram Sarabhai and Homi Bhabha and many, many other scientists did was to bring back education and universities to the center of our public policy and nation-building agenda.
Thanks so much for sharing all these points with all of us. One interesting question which comes from the audience, which now I'll take to Mr. Vikas Arya. The post-COVID situation has created a digital divide here in our country. How can we tackle it now? This is very important also because we are the only country that straddles poverty of sub-Saharan Africa much more worse than it, and also some of the richest people. And this digital divide means they can't afford, I mean, even for phones, one professor once explained it to me. He says, Tarun, a poor quality phone won't provide you the user experience for you to study beyond 5 minutes, because you'll be so irritated after a point, you will throw your phone away rather than sit for the lecture. Think of all these students who study in government schools. Will they have such good phones? No. Do you think this digital divide India is facing, that's a big problem for us?
My sense is that the digital divide is not as serious as what it's sounding, for the simple reason that those who even had the phones and good stuff, all the good gadgets, etc., also from a percentage perspective, haven't learned much in the last 2 years, right? Simply because this online learning is especially in kids. See, again, as you mature, like in a university, in that particular age bracket, it will be very different. But if, for example, you look at an average home or middle class, upper middle class, right? You have like 2 laptops, you have this thing, etc. I don't think much of learning has really happened, except a small percentage, I'm sure, has done extremely well. So I think that children have to go back to school.
I want to ask you one more question.
Can I just respond to the digital divide?
Yeah. So they have to go back to school. But now, having said that, going forward, I think the hybrid model is there to stay.
Hybrid model is there to stay.
Yeah. So in the hybrid model, you're right that so I'm more concerned actually going forward as to what's going to happen now.
Now, once the physical is
once the physical has come up now. But so now I think the hybrid model, I think, is going to be extremely effective. Wherein you do say 70-80% of learning in the class, but the 10, 15, 20% of the, the spike, that can happen to the hybrid mode. Okay. And I think that part, the children in the rural area, anyways, the physical also is not great. And even this part also, they are going to possibly, suffer. So I'm more worried going forward than the last, 2.5 years, wherein, yes, those who had the gadgets, etc., it's slightly better, but I don't think it's made such a huge difference as my gut feel.
Just slightly add, and maybe slight difference I have in that. You see, first of all, UNESCO has estimated that 1.5 billion people in the world, young people, have been removed out of education due to the pandemic. And they were there, it's almost irrecoverable for these 1.5 billion people, what has happened in the last 2 years. Now, Indian experience is like other experience, but let me give you some very sad Indian data. While online education was available for a lot of privileged schools, colleges, universities, I agree with him, universities were more effective. We had everything without uninterrupted for 2 years. Of course, one can argue about the learning experience and things like that. But the reality is, only 12 to 15% of Indian households, and I was shocked to get this data, only 12 to 15% of Indian households have 3 things which are essential for online education: a reasonably working electricity, reasonably working Wi-Fi, and a reasonably working equipment. So 85 to 88% of Indian households do not have this. So obviously no online education is happening. That's a lot of India and lot of school students and lot of university students. So if I were to suggest something, the most, while we, without sounding pessimistic, the next pandemic is not too far away. That's the reality. Every epidemiologist has already said it, and this is something going to happen. So this is a time for us to invest significantly in infrastructure, digital infrastructure across rural and urban India, high quality infrastructure, so that we are able to be better prepared for a future scenario whereby we will have to use technology, even if it means, as he rightly said, the quality of offerings that happens through education through technology is lesser. Because it's almost like if that is not there, the entire educational project is lost, as it has been the case with this.
And that is fear we all have, because as Mr. Professor C. Raj Kumar said in his first answer, the demographic dividend, in a sense, will mean that only today we have youngsters. 30 years hence, we'll be a nation of old people who will need health care, who won't have enough money for their basic medical. Your government hospitals are totally inequipped. It's going to be a disaster for this country after 30 years if we don't get our education right, because we won't be as rich to take care of so many old people. Japan, I think, for as the only country today who is facing that problem, but because they're very limited population, they take care of it fairly okay. But to say the least, even they are facing a lot of problems because of too many old people. India will have a problem that the world has never seen. I'm reading the last question, which has already been answered, but I thought fit to read out the question. So I'm reading it. Professor Rajkumar and Vikas Arya addressed the question. The discussion started on quantity and quality. In India, at the present moment, the quality education is really expensive and thus inaccessible to a large population of the country. How do you make the quality education accessible? It's been answered by the panel, but if they still would like to make a few points.
Sure. So I can give countless examples, but one of the things great institutions have always done is they have created access and scholarships for people to get education. In public institutions, we have used public funding. So, for example, I would have spent 2,000 rupees for my Delhi University degree, but that's not what the cost of my degree is. Taxpayers of India paid for it. So when we charge a much higher fee in Jindal or any other private institution, we don't get any governmental subsidy. So we charge whatever fee that is needed, which is actually the cost of what the education gets is there. However, what both Oxford, where I got the Rhodes Scholarship, and at Harvard I got 3 scholarships. I didn't spend 1 rupee to go to Oxford or Harvard. My father is a professor and mother is a government doctor. I simply couldn't have afforded to go here, but I got those scholarships which gave me access to these places. We do the same thing at Jindal. We've spent some 275 crores in the last 10 years towards scholarships, and we try to provide access to as many students we can. We should be doing more, and we hope to do more. But the point is, there is no other way other than both government as well as private sector contributing to in the form of scholarships, which will ensure that the access is available for people who simply can't afford. Because what we ended up doing is, if we don't do this, we will compromise on quality and end up offering mediocre education, which we are already doing. As Nitin Noria rightly told you, quality education is expensive. In India, quality education can still be cheaper than what is offered at Harvard. I'll give you a very simple example. Harvard University annual tuition fee is approximately 75 lakhs of rupees. 60 to 75 lakhs of rupees. Now, that's obviously expensive. Now, we could offer in India an annual tuition fee of, say, 5 to 7 lakhs high quality education. Now, that's way too expensive for a lot of Indians, even though it is 10 times lesser than Harvard University. Now, who is going to help doing that? Well, somebody has to pitch in to make that contribution. It can be the CSR and private philanthropy and donors on the one hand, and of course, the government on the other. But if you compromise on the quality and somehow believe that you can offer high quality education for 10,000 and 20,000, we are being misled and misguided, because everything that an academic institution does is unfortunately expensive, but then much cheaper. It's a bit like, we all know this, the Gravity movie that Hollywood made. The total cost of that movie was less than India's Mars mission. So we could do frugal innovation. We are good at it. We have amazing people, scientists who work tirelessly, who might be able to pay a 7th pay commission and then be happy about it. They are not greedy and they are committed. But you can't further reduce it and say, you know what, why don't you do it for free? I mean, that simply doesn't work.
Point well taken. One final comment from Mr. Vikas Arya.
Thank you. To add to this point, and he's talking about schooling space, I would once again come back to the teachers. And I would like to stress upon that we need to do either two things. Either need to really better quality train our teachers now, or else you need to get people from other sectors to move into this particular space, right? Whom we can pay more, right? And whom we attract out here. But otherwise, like we know of n number of schools, like in this different parts of the country, wherein the promoters have spent like crores in land, building, etc. You just go and ask them, say, we just don't know where to get the teachers from.
Yes.
They just don't know. They don't have an answer. They say, can you provide? It's okay, we'll pay. We'll pay like 70K, 80K, 1 lakh, 2 lakhs, whatever you want, we'll pay. But just get me the people.
But there are no teachers.
It's just not there. Quality.
Of
Quality. That's the key. Right? So to me, to make things accessible, and tier 2, we have traveled extensively. We have an associate program at the DV Group of Schools in Chennai, and we have traveled extensively to tier 2, tier 3 towns, in Tamil Nadu, and they are like, infra is fantastic. So money is not really a
issue.
See, a lot of people in India also, philanthropy actually is quite good. Here people do it in a quiet way. People do their own bit. So I think money is there. I refuse to believe that, again, from a schooling sector. Money is there. People do give, and in India, if you look at historically, there's a Gurukula system. It is all run by the local, right, local
So
community.
that raising money is not an issue. Getting teachers is an issue in here.
I think that's really the heart of.
I think if you go back and look at today's 45-minute discussion we had, we were lucky enough to get a lot of good points from both of our panelists. If some of these are heard by the people that matter. I think this, my last comment would be, if we could have some educations who are in parliament, some educationists who make it to parliament, and if these educationists are able to raise it among the 500 plus parliamentarians in the Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha mainly, I think that will make a difference. Because you see there is no educationist in parliament, hardly. Education is the most important element of a society, and no educationists are, where is the last time you heard a...
Sports and movies.
That's all. Sports and movies. We have had actors who hardly even attend, but no educationists in the Rajya Sabha who could give speeches which could provide direction. I think that is what, as a society, as a government, we should look, that there should be at least 5-7 educationists in the Rajya Sabha who speak about the next 50 years of this country. And I think that's the forum where actions can be taken on the inputs that you've provided. But I would like to thank both of you for sparing time and joining for this panel. Thank you so very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dhamma. Fantastic. You are amazing.
May I request Mr. K. Srinivasan, founder and chairman of Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to please come and give a token of respect to our Jindal University Vice Chancellor, Dr. Rajkumar. May I request Mr. S. Mohan, who is our Vice Chairman for Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to deliver a token of respect to Mr. Arya for giving his insightful speech. May I request Mr. Varadarajan, who is from the team Sansad Ratna Awards Committee, to give a token of respect to Tarun Nangia, who had made a wonderful conversation happen, and get the best out of the speakers we have on the dais. Tarun, just to add on, we are very glad to tell you that out of the best performing parliamentarians, the awards which we had given this morning, we had many educationalists turned politicians who are actually excelling in the parliament. So we have taken a bit notes of this, and there is something that we can do from the crux of this conversation. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Education, which is headed by Dr. C. Vinay, had been with us this morning. It was very unfortunate that he had to leave because he had to catch a flight, but I'm sure I'm going to share the crux of this conversation with him, and we would surely see what best can be done in the perspective of getting it legal, on law, so that things get much easier. And it was so insightful to hear all of you, and it was a mere pleasure to having you all with us. Thank you so much for your time. May I request the students from Hindu College, who had been patiently waiting with us since morning 8 o'clock, and I really appreciate your time with us today. Please come and do the final honors in closing our ceremony.
Yes, sir. You should come over sometime. Yes, sir. Pleasure, sir.
You got the best out of them. Thanks a lot. I can't ask for more.
Thank you. See you.
Yeah, we'll just. Can we all raise up for the national anthem and request the dignitaries to please join us for high tea, where we have a special arrangements for you. Thank you so much. With this, we close the 12th edition of Sansad Ratna Awards, and let's meet on the 13th edition of Sansad Ratna Awards.
Please be seated. Sir wants to